He had nothing left. No family, no home, no hope. Just frostbitten hands and a ridge cabin no one had touched in 40 years. Travis Holden thought he was just looking for shelter to survive the winter. But when he pried open that hidden panel in the back room, what he found in the darkness wasn't just a secret. It was $245 million in stolen fortune, and it was about to turn his life and an entire forgotten mountain town upside down. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. 2 years earlier, Travis Holden had been someone. He'd owned a small construction company in eastern Tennessee, the kind of business that built decks and renovated kitchens and fixed sagging porches for neighbors who paid in cash and homemade pie. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest work. He had a wife named Sarah who laughed like music, with a smile that could light up the darkest room. She worked part-time at the library and grew tomatoes in the backyard every summer, the kind that tasted like sunshine and dirt in the best possible way. And they had a son, Cody. 7 years old, with gaps in his teeth and a collection of rocks that he kept in shoeboxes under his bed. He wanted to be a geologist when he grew up, could name every type of stone he found, and spent hours reading books about minerals and earthquakes. They lived in a modest house with a blue front door and a tire swing hanging from the oak tree out front. The paint was peeling in places, and the roof needed work, but it was theirs. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was full. It was everything Travis had ever wanted. Then, one winter evening, black ice on Highway 41 took everything from him in the span of 3 seconds. It was a Tuesday. Sarah had driven to her sister's house 2 towns over to drop off some Christmas cookies. Cody had begged to go with her, excited to see his cousins. Travis had stayed home, finishing up paperwork for a job he'd completed that afternoon. He was sitting at the kitchen table, radio playing softly, when his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. When he answered, a voice on the other end, calm, professional, detached, told him there had been an accident. A semi-truck had jackknifed on the highway. Black ice. No time to react. Sarah's car had been hit head-on. The officer on the phone said they didn't suffer. Travis didn't believe him. How could you not suffer when the whole world ends in an instant? How could there be no pain when everything you are gets ripped away in the time it takes to blink? He drove to the hospital in a daze, hands shaking so hard he could barely grip the steering wheel. But by the time he got there, it was over. They were gone. Sarah, Cody, just gone. The funeral was a blur. People came. People spoke. Travis heard none of it. He stood at the graveside in a suit that didn't fit anymore, staring at 2 caskets that couldn't possibly hold the people he loved. After everyone left, he stayed. He stayed until the sun set and the gravediggers finished their work and the cemetery grew dark and silent. Then he drove home to a house that no longer felt like a home. Every room screamed their names. Cody's rock still sat on his dresser. Sarah's coffee mug still rested by the sink, half full, lipstick mark on the rim. The tire swing still swayed in the wind. Travis couldn't breathe in that house anymore. He couldn't sleep in their bed, couldn't walk past Cody's room without collapsing, so he didn't. He stopped going home. He slept in his truck, worked when he could focus, which wasn't often, drank when he couldn't, which was most of the time. The business started to fall apart. He missed deadlines, forgot to order materials, showed up to job sites hungover or not at all. Clients stopped calling. His crew quit. Within 6 months, the business he'd spent a decade building was gone. Within 8 months, the debts started piling up. He sold the house for less than it was worth just to pay off what he owed. The money that was left, insurance, savings, the sale, ran out faster than he expected. Grief has a way of making you stupid with cash. Drinking, driving, not caring. He bought things he didn't need, gave money to people who asked, spent nights in cheap motels staring at the ceiling and wishing it would all just stop. By the end of the first year, he had nothing. No business, no house, no family, no reason to keep going. He ended up in the Smoky Mountains, not because he wanted to be there, but because he had nowhere else to go. The mountains didn't ask questions, didn't judge, didn't expect anything. He could disappear there. And so he did. He lived rough. At first, he slept in his truck, an old Ford Ranger that rattled and coughed and barely made it up the mountain roads. He parked in campgrounds until rangers told him to move. Then he parked in logging roads until the truck finally gave out on a muddy trail 20 miles from nowhere. He left it there and kept walking. He lived in a tent for a while, moving camp every few days, staying out of sight. But as fall turned to winter, the tent wasn't enough. The cold came down from the north with teeth, biting through fabric and sleeping bags and skin. So he started sleeping in caves when he could find them, under bridges when he couldn't, in the deep woods where no one hiked and no one cared. He stopped shaving. His hair grew long and tangled. His clothes became rags stitched together with wire and hope. He stopped talking, stopped looking people in the eye on the rare occasions he crossed paths with hikers or hunters. He wasn't Travis Holden anymore. He was just another ghost drifting through the pines, invisible and forgotten. Most days he survived on whatever he could catch or scavenge. He set snares for rabbits, fished in streams with a line and hook he'd traded for, ate wild plants he'd learned to identify from a book he'd found in a campground trash can. He wasn't good at it, but he didn't starve. He drank from creeks, boiled water when he could, risked it when he couldn't. He got sick more than once, fever, chills, stomach cramps that left him curled up in the dirt for days. But he didn't die. Some part of him wanted to. Some part of him lay awake at night staring up at the stars and begging them to just let him go, to let him slip away quietly and be done with it all. But the other part, the stubborn, stupid part that had built a business from nothing and fixed broken things for a living, that part kept him breathing, kept him moving, kept him alive even when he didn't want to be. He wasn't suicidal, not exactly. He just didn't see a reason to fight anymore. If the mountain wanted to take him, he'd let it. But the mountain, it turned out, had other plans. It was late November, nearly 2 years after the accident, when the storm hit. The kind of storm that rolls down from Canada like a freight train, turning the sky grey and the air sharp and the whole ridge into a wall of white. Travis had been following a creek bed, looking for a place to wait it out. He'd learned by now to watch the sky, to feel the pressure drop, to know when something bad was coming. He had maybe an hour before it got dangerous. He moved quickly, boots crunching through the first layer of snow, breath fogging in the cold air. The creek led him deeper into the ridge, past fallen trees and rock outcroppings, into a part of the mountain he'd never explored. And that's when he saw it through the trees. A cabin, small, stone and timber, tucked so far back into the ridge that it looked like it had grown there, like the mountain had exhaled and left it behind. The roof was mostly intact, sloped and covered in moss. The windows were boarded up with old planks, grey and weathered. No smoke from the chimney, no footprints in the snow, no sign that anyone had been here in years, maybe decades. Travis approached cautiously, the way you approach anything that seems too good to be true. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by thick pines that blocked most of the wind. The stone foundation looked solid, the walls made of stacked logs chinked with what might have been mud or clay. A narrow porch ran along the front, sagging slightly but still standing. The door was heavy wood, scarred and faded, with a rusted padlock hanging from a metal hasp. Travis pulled on the lock. It held. He looked around, saw no one, heard nothing but the wind starting to pick up. He didn't have time to be polite. He braced himself, lifted his boot, and kicked the door just beside the lock. The wood around the hasp splintered. He kicked again. The screws pulled free, and the door swung inward with a groan that echoed through the empty woods. Travis stepped inside and stopped. The air was cold but dry. Dust coated every surface, thick as fur, like the place hadn't been disturbed in forever. Furniture sat under old tarps, a table, chairs, something that might have been a bed. A wood stove squatted in the corner, rusted but whole, the kind with a chimney pipe that ran up through the roof. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars and cans and things he couldn't quite make out in the dim light. It smelled like old wood and decades of silence, like a place that had been waiting. Travis dropped his pack on the floor and let out a breath he'd been holding for what felt like years. This wasn't much. It was small, dusty, probably full of problems he couldn't see yet. But it was shelter. It was walls. It was a roof that didn't leak and a door that closed. It was survival. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow began to fall harder, faster, erasing his footprints, covering the clearing in white. Travis closed the door, wedged it shut with a piece of broken furniture, and stood in the middle of the cabin, listening to the storm gather strength. For the first time in months, he felt something other than emptiness. Not hope, not yet. But something close, something like relief. He spent that first night huddled by the wood stove, feeding it scraps of broken furniture and dry wood he found stacked in the corner. The chimney drew well once he cleared out the birds' nests and debris. Smoke curled up and out, and warmth slowly filled the small space. It made his eyes water, made his throat burn, but he didn't care. He was warm. For the first time in months, he was warm. He wrapped himself in an old blanket he'd found under one of the tarps, and for the first time in 2 years, he slept without waking every hour to the sound of wind or rain or his own shivering. By morning, the storm had buried the ridge under 2 feet of snow. Travis stood on the porch, looking out at the white world, and knew he wasn't leaving any time soon. Even if he wanted to, the trails were impassable. He'd be stuck here for days, maybe weeks, depending on how bad it got. But as he looked back at the cabin, he realized he didn't mind. For the first time since Sarah and Cody died, he had a place to stay. Not just for a night, but for a while, maybe longer. So he started to settle in. The cabin was small, just one main room, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet, with the wood stove in one corner and a makeshift kitchen area in another. There was a back room, narrow and dark, that might have been a bedroom or storage space, and up above, accessible by a ladder so rickety it swayed when he climbed it, was a small loft with a sloped ceiling and a single window that looked out over the ridge. The previous owner had left things behind. Canned goods on the shelves, most of them so old the labels had faded to nothing. A few books with pages yellowed and brittle, their spines cracked and covers missing. Some tools, a hammer, a saw, a rusted axe. A coat hanging on a peg by the door, heavy wool that smelled like tobacco and age. Travis wondered who had lived here, why they'd left, why no one had come back. He spent the next few days making the place livable. He cleared out the debris, broken glass, rotted wood, the remains of what might have been a mattress that mice had turned into a nest. He patched the worst of the gaps in the walls with mud and moss, stuffing it into cracks where the wind whistled through. He cleaned the stove, scrubbed the rust off the grates, made sure the chimney wasn't blocked. He swept the floors, wiped down the shelves, opened the windows for the first time in who knows how long to let fresh air sweep through. It took 3 days before the place felt like something more than a tomb. By the 4th day, Travis had settled into a rhythm. Wake with the sun, feed the stove, melt snow for water, eat whatever he had, dried meat, old crackers, a can of beans he'd found that hadn't exploded yet. Then spend the day working, fixing the door so it hung properly, reinforcing the porch so it didn't sag, chopping firewood from fallen branches in the clearing. It wasn't much, but it was purpose. And purpose, Travis was learning, was the only thing that kept the darkness from swallowing you whole. On the 4th day, he noticed something strange. The back room, the one he'd been using to store firewood and supplies, had an odd floor. Most of the cabin was rough-hewn planks, uneven and splintered, the kind you'd expect in a place built decades ago. But in the back room, there was a section about 6 feet square where the wood was different. Smoother, darker, almost polished, like someone had spent time on it. And when he walked across it, the sound changed. The rest of the floor creaked and groaned under his weight, but this section sounded hollow, like there was space beneath it. Travis knelt down and ran his fingers along the seams. They were tight, almost invisible, but they were there. Straight lines forming a perfect square. He pressed down on one corner. It didn't give. He tried another spot. Nothing. There was no handle, no obvious way to lift it. But it was definitely intentional. Someone had built this, hidden it, made it look like part of the floor. But why? Travis sat back on his heels, staring at the boards. His mind raced. Was it a cellar? A storage space? Something else? And why go to so much trouble to hide it? He spent the rest of the afternoon examining the floor from every angle. He tapped the boards, listening for changes in sound. He ran his hands along the edges, feeling for catches or hinges. He even tried prying at the seams with a knife, but they were too tight. Whoever had built this had done it well. By evening, he was frustrated. He sat by the stove, eating a can of soup he'd heated over the flames, and thought about it. There had to be a way in. People didn't build secret compartments and then seal them forever. There was a mechanism, a key, something. He just had to find it. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in the loft, staring up at the sloped ceiling, listening to the wind outside. His mind kept drifting back to the floor. What was under there? Why hide it? And most importantly, did he really want to know? Part of him said to leave it alone, that whatever was beneath those boards had been hidden for a reason, that opening it might bring trouble he didn't need. But another part of him, the curious part, the part that used to solve problems for a living, couldn't let it go. He'd spent 2 years drifting, purposeless, waiting to fade away. Now, for the first time, something had caught his attention. Something had made him feel alive again, even if it was just curiosity. The next morning, Travis started searching the cabin more carefully. If there was a way into that compartment, there might be a clue somewhere. He went through the main room first, checking drawers in the old desk, opening cabinets, running his hands along shelves. Nothing. He moved to the loft, pulling up the few pieces of furniture, checking behind loose boards, and there, tucked behind a stack of old newspapers from 1978, he found a toolbox. It was metal, rusted at the corners, with a latch that stuck when he tried to open it. He forced it, and the lid popped up with a screech. Inside were tools, a pry bar, a hammer, a set of wrenches, screwdrivers with wooden handles worn smooth from use, and taped to the inside of the lid, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was a small brass key. Travis's heart started to pound. He lifted the key carefully, turned it over in his palm. It was old, tarnished green in places, with a simple design. Not a house key, not a padlock key. Something else. Something specific. He climbed down from the loft and walked to the back room. He stood over the hidden section of floor, key in hand, and realized he had no idea where it went. There was no visible keyhole, no lock, just smooth boards and tight seams. He knelt down and examined the floor more carefully, this time looking for anything, any mark, any imperfection. And then he saw it. In the corner of the square section, almost invisible unless you were looking for it, was a tiny hole, no bigger than a pencil tip. Travis slid the key toward it. Too big. He frowned, turned the key over, examined it from every angle. Then he noticed something. The key wasn't solid. The shaft was hollow, and inside, barely visible, was a smaller pin. He worked at it with his fingernail until it slid free. It was thin, maybe 3 inches long, with a notched end, a skeleton key. He slid it into the tiny hole. It went in smoothly, like it belonged there. He turned it. Click. The sound was soft but unmistakable. Something had unlocked. Travis pulled the pin free and set it aside. He pressed down on the corner of the square section again. This time, it gave slightly. He grabbed the pry bar from the toolbox and worked it into the seam. The boards resisted at first, swollen from years of moisture and time. But slowly, with pressure and patience, they began to lift. One board came free, then another, then another. Beneath them was a metal hatch, small and square with a keyhole in the center. Travis slid the brass key in. It turned with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. He lifted the hatch. Cold air rushed out, stale and dry like opening a crypt that had been sealed for decades. Below was darkness. Travis grabbed his flashlight, a cheap plastic one he'd found in a campground trash can months ago, held together with electrical tape and hope, and shone it down. Stone steps, rough cut and steep, leading down into the earth. His breath came faster now. This wasn't just a storage space. This wasn't a root cellar or a place to hide canned goods. This was something else, something deeper, something intentional. He stood there for a long moment, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness below, and felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Fear. Not the dull, empty fear of dying alone in the woods, but sharp, immediate fear. The kind that meant you were about to step into something you couldn't take back. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Snow began to fall again, soft and quiet, covering the world in white. Inside the cabin, Travis Holden stood at the edge of a hidden passage, staring down into darkness, and made a choice. He descended. The stone steps were narrow and uneven, carved directly into the bedrock beneath the cabin. Travis moved slowly, one hand on the cold wall for balance, the other holding the flashlight. Each step creaked under his weight, and the air grew colder the deeper he went. 10 steps, 15, 20. Then the passage opened into a small chamber. Travis swept the flashlight across the space, and his breath caught in his throat. The walls were lined with stone, reinforced with timber beams that looked hand-hewn and ancient, and along those walls were shelves, wooden shelves built into the rock itself, and on those shelves were boxes, dozens of them. Wooden crates, metal lockboxes, leather cases with brass clasps, all arranged with precision, like someone had organized them carefully, methodically, with purpose. Travis stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This wasn't a storage room. This was a vault. He stepped closer, boots scraping against the stone floor. His hand trembled as he reached for the nearest crate. It was heavy, the wood old but solid. He set it on the ground and worked at the latch. It opened with a crack. Inside, wrapped in cloth that might have once been white but was now grey with age, were bars. Metal bars, stamped with numbers and symbols he didn't recognize. He pulled one out, felt the weight of it. Cold, dense, heavy in a way that meant something. He shone the flashlight on the markings. And then he saw it. Gold. 999.9. The numbers were clear, stamped into the metal itself. This wasn't a replica, this wasn't painted steel or some kind of joke. This was gold, real gold. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped it. He set the bar down and opened another crate. More gold. 6 bars, each one identical. He moved to a metal lockbox, forced it open. Inside were stones, dozens of them, loose in a velvet pouch that had rotted at the edges. He poured them into his palm. They caught the flashlight beam and exploded into color: red, blue, green, clear. Rubies, sapphires, emeralds, diamonds, each one the size of his thumbnail or larger. He stumbled backward, hitting the stone wall, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. His mind couldn't hold it, couldn't process it. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. But he kept looking. Another case held cash. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills bundled with rubber bands that had dried and cracked. He picked up one bundle. 50 bills. $5,000. He counted the stacks. 10, 20, 30, more. Another box. More cash. And another. And another. Travis sank to the ground, his legs giving out. He sat there in the cold darkness, surrounded by more wealth than he'd ever imagined, and felt his mind fracture. Where did this come from? Who hid it here? And why? His flashlight flickered. He tapped it hard, and the beam steadied. He looked around the vault again, trying to see it with clear eyes. This wasn't random. This wasn't thrown together. Everything was organized, labeled, arranged. Someone had spent time here, years maybe, building this, filling it, protecting it. At the far end of the vault, he noticed something else. A desk. Small, made of wood, pushed against the wall. On it sat a leather-bound book and a kerosene lamp. Travis crawled over, his whole body shaking now from cold or shock or both. He lit the lamp with a match from his pocket. Warm light filled the chamber, pushing back the shadows. He opened the book. The pages were filled with handwriting. Neat at first, then shakier as the entries progressed. Dates, names, numbers. It was a ledger, a record. And as Travis began to read, the story of this place and the fortune beneath it started to unfold. What happens next will turn this quiet mountain cabin into the center of a dangerous mystery, reveal a truth that's been buried for decades, and remind us that sometimes the biggest discoveries come when we have nothing left to lose. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Travis held the leather-bound ledger in his trembling hands, the kerosene lamp casting dancing shadows across the yellowed pages. The handwriting was careful at first, almost elegant, dated back to 1976. He began to read, and with each line, the story of this hidden vault started to piece itself together like a puzzle he never wanted to solve. The first entry was simple, almost mundane. Moved to the ridge today, built the cabin foundation. No one knows I'm here. That's how it needs to be. Started with 3 bars from the Philadelphia job. More to come. Travis's stomach tightened. Philadelphia job. That didn't sound like legitimate business. He flipped forward, scanning entries from 1977, 1978, 1979. Each one documented acquisitions. Gold from estate sales, gemstones from private collectors, cash from sources the writer never fully explained. Sometimes the entries were detailed, listing provenance and value. Other times they were cryptic, just dates and numbers that meant nothing to Travis. But one thing was clear. Whoever had created this vault had been collecting for decades, and they'd been very, very careful about it. He turned more pages, his eyes catching on an entry from 1983. Added the Cartier emeralds today. Woman didn't know what she had. Paid her $12,000, worth closer to $2 million. She cried when I left. Said it was her grandmother's collection. I didn't tell her the truth. What good would it do? Travis felt sick. These weren't just acquisitions. Some of these were cons, manipulations, taking advantage of people who didn't know better. He kept reading, unable to stop now, pulled forward by morbid curiosity. The entries continued through the 80s, then into the 90s. The handwriting grew shakier as time passed, the dates more sporadic. In 1997, an entry read, "Doctor says I have maybe 5 years. The cancer's in my lungs, my liver, everywhere. I always thought I'd have time to make this right, to return what I took. But time ran out. It always does." Travis's hands went still. So the person who built this vault had died. Probably right here in this cabin alone, surrounded by a fortune they could never spend. He flipped to the final pages. The last entry was dated 2002. The handwriting was barely legible, shaking so badly the words ran together. "I'm out of time. The pain is too much. I tried to document everything, tried to make a record so someone could return it all, but I don't have the strength anymore. My name is Eugene Birch. I was an art dealer in New York until 1975 when I got involved with the wrong people. I helped them move stolen goods, paintings, jewelry, gold. I skimmed from every job. They never knew. By the time they found out, I was gone. I came here to hide. Built this place with my own hands. Spent 27 years filling this vault with things I stole, things I bought with stolen money, things I took from people who trusted me. I thought I was building security. All I built was a tomb. If you're reading this, you found what I couldn't bear to destroy. I don't know what you'll do with it, but I hope you're better than I was. I hope you do what I couldn't. Make it right. Return what can be returned. Donate what can't. Don't let this fortune rot in the ground like I'm about to. Signed, Eugene Birch, February 14, 2002. Travis closed the ledger slowly, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. Eugene Birch, an art dealer turned thief, a man who'd spent nearly 3 decades hiding in the mountains with a fortune he stole, a man who died alone, filled with regret, hoping someone would stumble across his secret and fix what he'd broken. And now that someone was Travis, a grieving, broken man who'd lost everything and had nothing to lose, except now he did. Now he had 245 million reasons to be terrified. Travis stood up, legs unsteady, and looked around the vault with new eyes. This wasn't just treasure. This was evidence, proof of crimes spanning decades. And if Eugene had been involved with dangerous people, the kind who killed over money, then those people might still be looking for what he took. Travis's breath came faster. He needed to think, needed to figure out what to do. But first, he needed to know exactly what he was dealing with. He spent the next 3 hours cataloging everything in the vault, writing it down in a notebook he'd found in the cabin. He worked methodically, opening every box, every crate, every case. 17 bars of gold, each weighing approximately 400 troy ounces. Current market value, he did the math in his head, remembered gold was trading around $1,800 an ounce, roughly $12 million. 7 velvet pouches of loose gemstones. He couldn't value them accurately, but even a conservative estimate put them at 20 to 30 million. 32 bundles of cash, each containing approximately $50,000. 1.6 million in bills. Then he found the paintings. They were rolled in tubes, protected by layers of cloth and sealed in waterproof cases. Travis carefully unrolled the first one. It was abstract, all bold colors and violent brushstrokes. In the corner, a signature. Pollock. He didn't know art, but he knew that name. Jackson Pollock, the kind of painter whose work sold for millions. He checked the others. Rothko, de Kooning, Kandinsky. Names he'd heard even in his blue-collar life. Each painting was documented in a small notebook Eugene had left with them, listing the original owner, how he'd acquired it, and an estimated value. Travis did the math. The paintings alone were worth over $100 million. Combined with everything else, the gold, the gems, the cash, the other items he hadn't even examined yet, the total came to approximately $245 million. Travis sat on the cold stone floor and laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the kind of laugh that comes when your brain can't process reality anymore, when the absurdity becomes so overwhelming that laughter is the only response. He'd spent 2 years living in the dirt, eating from trash cans, barely surviving. He'd lost his wife, his son, his business, his home, everything that mattered. And now, through sheer chance, he was sitting in a vault filled with more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. He climbed back up the stone steps, his mind spinning. When he emerged into the back room of the cabin, the afternoon sun was already fading. He'd been down there for hours. His hands were filthy, his clothes covered in dust and grime. He needed to think, needed to figure out his next move. But first, he needed air. He stepped out onto the porch and breathed in the cold mountain wind. The snow had stopped, leaving the world covered in pristine white. Everything looked peaceful, innocent, like the kind of place where nothing bad could happen. But beneath his feet, buried in stone and darkness, was proof that bad things happened everywhere. That people lied and stole and destroyed lives. That fortunes were built on other people's suffering. Travis thought about Eugene Birch, a man who'd spent 27 years alone on this ridge, surrounded by wealth he couldn't use, eaten alive by guilt. A man who'd wanted to make things right but never found the courage. And now that burden had fallen to Travis. He went back inside, sealed the hatch, replaced the floorboards, and covered them with firewood like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. That night, Travis lay in the loft, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His mind ran through scenarios, each one darker than the last. If he reported the vault to authorities, what would happen? Would they believe him? Would they think he was involved? Would Eugene's old partners come looking for their share? If he tried to return the stolen items, how would he even start? Most of the original owners were probably dead by now. The paintings had been stolen decades ago. The gemstones had changed hands multiple times. And the gold, where had that even come from? But if he kept it, if he used it, wasn't he just as guilty as Eugene, profiting from other people's pain? He thought about Sarah and Cody, about how hard they'd worked for everything they had, how Sarah clipped coupons and shopped sales and made every dollar stretch, How Cody saved his allowance in a jar for months to buy a rock tumbler. They'd been good people, honest people. What would they think of him now, sitting on a stolen fortune, trying to decide if he should keep it? The next morning, Travis made a decision. He needed information. He couldn't make any choices until he understood exactly what he was dealing with. He needed to know if anyone was still looking for this treasure, if the original crimes were still prosecutable, if there were families out there who deserved to have their property returned. He packed a small bag with some of Eugene's cash, just $500, enough for supplies, and hiked down the mountain. It took him 4 hours to reach the nearest town, a place called Ridgeway, barely big enough to have a post office and a general store. He looked like hell, hair wild, beard unkempt, clothes ragged, but his money was green and no one asked questions. He bought supplies first: food, batteries, a better flashlight. Then he went to the public library. It was a small building with old computers and a librarian who looked at him suspiciously but let him use the internet for free. Travis started researching. He typed in Eugene Birch, art dealer, New York, and held his breath. The results came back slowly. There wasn't much. A few mentions in articles from the 70s and 80s. Eugene had owned a gallery in Manhattan, specializing in modern art. He'd had a good reputation until 1975, when he suddenly closed the gallery and disappeared. There were rumors of financial trouble, whispers about questionable deals, but nothing concrete. No criminal charges, no arrest warrants, just a man who vanished. Travis dug deeper. He searched for stolen art from that era, for heists and thefts and missing collections. What he found made his stomach turn. In 1974, a private collection worth millions had been stolen from a brownstone in Philadelphia. The thieves were never caught. In 1976, a museum in Boston lost 3 paintings during a renovation. In 1978, an estate sale in Connecticut was later found to have sold forged pieces while the real art disappeared. The pattern continued through the 80s and 90s. Dozens of thefts, hundreds of missing pieces, and no one ever arrested. Eugene Birch's name never appeared in any of the police reports or news articles. He'd been careful, smart. He'd stayed in the shadows, skimming and stealing and covering his tracks. Travis sat back in the creaky library chair and rubbed his face. This was bigger than he'd thought. The items in that vault weren't just valuable, they were evidence in unsolved crimes spanning 4 decades. If he came forward, he'd be opening investigations that had gone cold years ago. He'd be pointing fingers at dead men and stirring up pain for families who'd moved on. But if he stayed silent, those families would never know what happened to their stolen property, would never get closure, would never get justice. He spent the rest of the day researching the individual items he remembered from the vault. The Pollock painting matched the description of one stolen from a private collector in 1981. The collector, a woman named Patricia Hamilton, had died in 2007. Her children had given interviews over the years, talking about how the theft had devastated their mother, how she'd spent decades looking for that painting. Travis felt sick. He could return it now, could give those children something back. But how? If he showed up with a stolen painting, wouldn't they want to know where he got it? Wouldn't the police get involved? The gemstones were harder to trace. Eugene's ledger mentioned buying some from estate sales, stealing others from collectors who didn't know their value. Without serial numbers or certificates, there was no way to prove ownership. The gold was similar. The bars were stamped with dates and purity levels, but nothing that tied them to specific thefts. They could have come from anywhere. As the library closed and Travis stepped back out into the cold evening air, he realized something. There was no clean answer here. No simple solution. No matter what he did, someone would be hurt. If he kept the fortune, he'd be profiting from crime. If he returned it, he'd be opening himself up to investigation, suspicion, maybe even prosecution. And if he walked away, left the vault sealed and pretended he'd never found it, then Eugene's dying wish to make things right would go unfulfilled. Travis hiked back up the mountain in darkness, his flashlight cutting a narrow path through the trees. When he reached the cabin, it looked different somehow. Before, it had been shelter. Now, it was a burden. He went inside, lit the wood stove, and sat in the silence. For the first time since Sarah and Cody died, Travis found himself praying. Not for answers, not for forgiveness, just for the strength to do the right thing, whatever that was. Over the next week, Travis fell into a strange routine. During the day, he worked on the cabin, fixing the roof, replacing broken windows, making the place more secure. At night, he descended into the vault and went through Eugene's ledger page by page, trying to piece together the full story. He learned that Eugene had been divorced, childless, estranged from what little family he had. He'd come to the mountains to escape not just the law, but himself. He'd built the cabin alone over the course of 2 years, hauling materials up the ridge by hand. He'd lived simply, growing vegetables in the summer, hunting in the winter, making trips to town only once or twice a year for supplies. And he'd spent his nights in the vault, cataloguing his collection, writing letters he never sent, trying to justify what he'd done. One entry from 1994 stood out to Travis. Eugene had written, "I tell myself I'm preserving these pieces, that they're safer here than out in the world where they could be damaged or destroyed. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I'm a coward. I stole them because I wanted them, because I felt entitled to beauty that others paid for, because I thought I was smarter than everyone else, and now I'm trapped. If I return them, I go to prison. If I keep them, I die alone with my guilt. There is no good choice. There never was." Travis understood that feeling now, the weight of impossible choices, the knowledge that every path led somewhere painful. He thought about what Eugene had written in his final entry. Make it right. Return what can be returned. But how? Travis wasn't a lawyer, wasn't connected, wasn't someone people would trust with information about a $245 million fortune. If he went to the police, they'd want to know everything. How he found it, why he waited, what he'd already taken. They'd tear apart his life looking for connections to Eugene, to the original crimes, to anything they could prosecute. And what about the dangerous people Eugene had mentioned, the ones he'd stolen from? If they were still alive, still looking, then Travis coming forward would be like painting a target on his back. But staying silent felt wrong too. Felt like betraying Sarah's memory. She'd always been honest, almost painfully so. She'd returned extra change when cashiers made mistakes. She'd driven across town to give back a wallet she'd found in a parking lot. She would never understand him keeping stolen property, no matter how much it was worth. Travis sat at Eugene's desk in the vault, the ledger open in front of him, and made a list. On one side he wrote, reasons to keep it, financial security, ability to start over, help people without questions, honor Eugene's work preserving the art. On the other side, reasons to return it. It's stolen. Families deserve closure. It's the right thing to do. Sarah would want me to. He stared at the 2 columns for a long time. Then slowly, he drew a line through the first one. Money didn't matter. Security didn't matter. What mattered was living in a way that honored the people he'd lost. And Sarah, wherever she was, wouldn't want him building a new life on someone else's stolen dreams. But he still didn't know how to return it. Not safely, not without destroying himself in the process. He needed help, needed someone who understood law and art and how to navigate this kind of mess. But who? He thought about the librarian in Ridgeway, about the sheriff he'd seen patrolling Main Street, about the pastor whose church sign he'd passed on the way into town. None of them felt right. This wasn't something you trusted to strangers. Then he remembered something. Years ago, before everything fell apart, he'd done work for a lawyer named Patricia. She'd hired him to renovate her office, and they'd talked while he worked. She'd specialized in estate law, probate cases, helping families navigate complicated inheritances. She'd been kind, sharp, and most importantly, she'd told him once that attorney-client privilege meant she couldn't repeat anything he told her, even if he wasn't technically her client yet. Travis didn't know if she was still practicing, didn't know if she'd even remember him. but it was the only lead he had. The next morning, he hiked back down to Ridgeway and used the library computer to search for her. Patricia Vance, attorney at law. Her website was simple but professional. She was still in Tennessee, about 3 hours from the mountain, in a town called Greenfield. Travis stared at her phone number for a long time. Then he walked to the payphone outside the general store. He didn't have a cell phone anymore, hadn't for 2 years, and dialed. The phone rang 3 times. Then a woman's voice answered. "Vance Legal Services, this is Patricia." Travis's mouth went dry. "Hi, my name is Travis Holden. You probably don't remember me, but I did some work for you about 6 years ago. Renovated your office." There was a pause. "Travis, my God, I heard about your family. I'm so sorry." His throat tightened. "Thank you." Another pause. "What can I do for you, Travis?" He took a breath. "I need legal advice about something I found, something complicated and valuable and probably illegal, and I don't know what to do." Patricia's voice shifted, became more professional. "Are you in trouble?" "Not yet," Travis said, "but I might be soon." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can you come to my office?" "When?" "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Don't bring anything with you. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Just come." Travis felt relief flood through him. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Patricia said. "If this is what I think it is, we're both about to step into something dangerous." She hung up. Travis stood at the payphone, receiver still in his hand, and felt the weight of his decision settle over him like snow. There was no going back now. He'd made his choice. He was going to try to make this right. He just hoped he'd live long enough to see it through. That night, back at the cabin, Travis sat by the wood stove and wrote a letter. It was addressed to no one, just words he needed to say out loud, even if no one would ever read them. "Sarah, I found something. Something impossible and terrible and worth more money than I can even understand. A fortune built on theft and lies. And I have to decide what to do with it. Part of me wants to keep it, wants to use it to start over, to build something new, to make sure I never feel that kind of desperation again. But I know that's not what you'd want. You'd tell me that money built on other people's pain isn't money at all. It's just guilt with a price tag. So I'm going to try to return it. Try to make it right. I don't know if I can. Don't know if I'll survive the attempt. But I have to try. Because you and Cody deserved a man who did the right thing even when it was hard. And I failed you so many times in those last years, drinking, avoiding, falling apart. I can't fail you in this. I won't. I love you. I miss you. And I'm going to make you proud, even if it kills me. Travis." He folded the letter carefully and placed it in the desk drawer. Then he went down into the vault one more time. He stood in the center of that cold stone chamber, surrounded by $245 million in stolen art and jewels and gold, and he made a promise. To Eugene, to the families who'd lost these treasures, to himself. This fortune would not rot in the ground. It would be returned. Justice, even delayed by decades, would finally be served. And Travis Holden, the man who'd lost everything, would be the one to deliver it. Tomorrow, he'd meet with Patricia. Tomorrow, the real journey would begin. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, Travis felt something he'd thought was gone forever. He felt purpose. And that, he realized, was worth more than all the gold in the world. The drive to Greenfield took Travis 3 hours through winding mountain roads that eventually opened into rolling farmland. He'd borrowed an old pickup from a guy in Ridgeway who owed him a favor. Travis had fixed his tractor the week before and promised to return it by nightfall. The truck rattled and coughed. The heater barely worked, but it ran. That was enough. Patricia's office sat above a hardware store on Main Street, the kind of place that still had a barber shop with a spinning pole and a diner that served breakfast all day. Travis climbed the narrow stairs, his boots heavy on the wood, and knocked on the frosted glass door that read Vance Legal Services in gold lettering. Patricia opened it herself. She was in her late 50s now, her hair more silver than he remembered, but her eyes were still sharp and assessing. She looked him up and down, his worn jacket, his too long hair, his weathered face, and her expression softened. "Travis, come in." Her office was warm, filled with books and files and the smell of coffee. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. "Sit. Talk to me." Travis sat, suddenly unsure where to start. How do you explain finding $245 million in stolen treasure beneath a cabin you bought for shelter? Patricia must have sensed his hesitation because she leaned forward, hands folded on her desk. "Whatever you tell me stays between us. Attorney-client privilege begins the moment you walked through that door. So take your time, but tell me everything." Travis took a breath and began. He told her about the cabin, about the hidden floor, about the vault beneath. He told her about Eugene Birch and the ledger, about the gold and gemstones and paintings worth more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. He told her about the research he'd done, about the stolen items, about the families who'd never gotten closure. He talked for 40 minutes straight, and Patricia didn't interrupt once. She just listened, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When Travis finally finished, the office was quiet except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. Patricia set down her pen and looked at him. "You understand what you're sitting on, don't you?" "A nightmare," Travis said. "Evidence," Patricia corrected. "Evidence in multiple federal crimes. Grand larceny, interstate transportation of stolen property, fraud, possibly money laundering. And the fact that Eugene Birch is dead doesn't make any of it go away." Travis's stomach sank. "So if I come forward, you'll be protected as a whistleblower, but you'll also be investigated. The FBI will want to know everything, how you found it, why you waited, whether you touched anything. They'll examine your finances, your history, looking for any connection to Eugene or the original crimes." "I never met him, never even heard his name until I read that ledger." Patricia nodded. "I believe you, but they'll need to verify that, and in the meantime, word will get out. Cases like this don't stay quiet. Reporters will show up. People who think they're owed a piece will come forward with claims. And if Eugene was involved with organized crime, like his ledger suggests, those people might come looking too." Travis felt the weight of it pressing down on him. "So what do I do?" Patricia was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There's a federal prosecutor I know, Marcus. Good man, honest, specializes in art theft and cultural property crimes. If anyone can handle this quietly, it's him. I can reach out, set up a meeting under privilege, see what our options are. And if he says I'm screwed, then we figure out plan B," Patricia said. "But Travis, you did the right thing coming here. This isn't something you can handle alone." Travis left her office an hour later with a plan. Patricia would contact the prosecutor, arrange a confidential meeting, and they'd move forward from there. In the meantime, Travis was to go back to the cabin, secure the vault, and wait. Don't touch anything. Don't tell anyone. Just wait. But as Travis drove back up into the mountains, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that somehow, somewhere, someone already knew what he'd found. He was right. When Travis pulled up to the cabin 3 hours later, something was wrong. The door was open. Not kicked in, not broken, just open, swinging gently in the wind. He killed the engine and sat in the truck, heart pounding. He hadn't left it open. He was obsessive about closing doors, about securing the few things he had. Someone had been here, was maybe still here. Travis reached under the seat and pulled out a tire iron. It wasn't much, but it was something. He climbed out of the truck slowly, boots crunching on the snow, and approached the cabin. The door creaked as he pushed it wider. "Hello?" His voice echoed in the empty space. No answer. He stepped inside. The main room looked untouched, furniture still in place, stove cold but intact. But the back room. The door to the back room was open, and the firewood he'd stacked over the hidden hatch was scattered across the floor. Travis's blood ran cold. Someone had found it. He moved quickly to the back room, tire iron raised. The floorboards were pulled up, the hatch hanging open. He shone his flashlight down into the vault. Empty. No, not empty. He descended the stone steps, hands shaking. The boxes were still there, the crates, the cases, but they'd been moved, opened, examined. Someone had gone through everything. At the desk, Eugene's ledger was gone. So was the notebook where Travis had catalogued everything. On the desk, in their place, was a single playing card, the ace of spades, and written on it in red marker, "We know what you found. We know who you are. Stay quiet and live. Talk and die." Travis stumbled backward, his breath coming in short gasps. They'd been here. Whoever Eugene had stolen from, whoever had been looking for this fortune for decades, they knew. They'd found him. He climbed back up, his mind racing. How? How did they know? He'd been careful, told no one except Patricia, and she was bound by privilege. Unless they'd been watching the cabin all along, waiting to see if anyone would stumble across Eugene's secret, waiting to see what they'd do. Travis paced the main room, trying to think. If they knew about him, they knew about the truck he'd borrowed. They could follow him back to Ridgeway, could hurt the people there, could hurt Patricia. He grabbed his pack, threw in what little he had, and made a decision. He couldn't stay here, couldn't lead them back to anyone else. He had to disappear. Again. But this time, he wouldn't go quietly. He pulled out the piece of paper Patricia had given him with her cell phone number. There was no phone in the cabin, but there was a payphone at a gas station about 5 miles down the mountain. He could get there on foot in under 2 hours if he moved fast. Travis left the cabin, didn't even close the door behind him. Let them think he was running scared. Let them think they'd won. He hiked through the darkening woods, moving quickly, his breath fogging in the cold air. When he reached the gas station, it was nearly dark. He fed quarters into the payphone and dialed Patricia's number. She answered on the second ring. "Travis?" "They know," he said, voice tight. "Someone broke into the cabin, went through the vault, left a threatening note." "My God, are you hurt?" "No, but I can't stay there. Can't lead them to anyone." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Listen to me carefully. I spoke with Marcus, the prosecutor. He wants to meet, tonight. Can you get to Knoxville? That's 2 hours from here. I'll meet you halfway. There's a rest stop on Highway 75, mile marker 83. Be there in 90 minutes. I'll bring Marcus. We'll figure this out." "Patricia, these people—" "I know," she said, "but you're not alone anymore. Trust me." The line went dead. Travis stood at that payphone, weighing his options. He could run, take what cash he'd hidden in his pack, about $2,000 from Eugene's stash, and disappear into another state, another life. Or he could trust Patricia, trust that the law could protect him from people who'd spent decades stealing and killing and hiding in shadows. It wasn't much of a choice. He'd already decided back in the vault that he'd do the right thing, no matter the cost. He started walking toward the highway, thumb out, hoping for a ride. A trucker picked him up 20 minutes later, a guy named Dale who talked about his kids and didn't ask questions. Travis rode in silence, watching the dark mountains slide past, and thought about Eugene. About a man who'd spent 27 years hiding from people just like the ones threatening Travis now. About how Eugene had died alone, crushed by guilt, unable to make things right. Travis wouldn't make the same mistake. The rest stop appeared in the distance, bright lights cutting through the darkness. Dale dropped him off with a wave and Travis walked into the parking lot. Patricia's car was already there, a silver sedan parked under a streetlight. She stepped out when she saw him, followed by a man in his 40s wearing a suit and an expression that said he'd seen too much to be shocked by anything. "Travis, this is Marcus Chen, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Tennessee." Marcus extended his hand. "Mr. Holden, Patricia's filled me in on the basics. I need to hear it from you." They sat in Patricia's car, Travis in the back, and he told the story again. Every detail, every entry from Eugene's ledger, every item in the vault. Marcus listened, occasionally asking clarifying questions, taking notes on a tablet. When Travis finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "The ace of spades," he finally said. "That's a calling card, I've seen it before, years ago, in a case involving stolen art from the 70s. We never made arrests, but we had a suspect. A man named Victor Salerno. He was Eugene Birch's partner before Eugene disappeared. Travis felt his stomach drop. Partner? Eugene wasn't working alone, Marcus said. Victor ran the operation. Eugene was the front man, the dealer with the legitimate gallery, but Victor was the one with connections to organized crime, to the people who stole the pieces in the first place. When Eugene vanished in 1975, Victor spent years looking for him, thought Eugene had run off with his share. He did, Travis said. That vault is full of Victor's property, or what Victor stole. Marcus nodded. Which means Victor's been watching that cabin, probably for decades, waiting. And when you showed up, when you found the vault, you triggered something. Now he knows where his fortune is, and he wants it back. So what do I do? Travis asked. We bring Victor in, Marcus said. We use the evidence in that vault to finally close cases that have been open for 40 years, but to do that, we need you to help us. How? You go back to the cabin, Marcus said. You act like you're scared, like you're going to give him what he wants. You become bait. Travis stared at him. You want me to set a trap? We'll have agents on site, full surveillance. The moment Victor or anyone associated with him shows up, we take them down. We recover the fortune, return it to the rightful owners or their estates, and close this chapter. And if something goes wrong? Patricia asked, her voice tight. Nothing will go wrong, Marcus said. But Travis could hear the uncertainty beneath the confidence. This was dangerous. Victor had been evading law enforcement for nearly 50 years. He was smart, careful, ruthless. Give me a minute, Travis said. He stepped out of the car and walked to the edge of the parking lot. The highway stretched into darkness, headlights cutting through the night like distant stars. He thought about Sarah and Cody, about the life they'd built together, honest and simple and good. About how Sarah used to say that doing the right thing wasn't about whether it was easy. It was about whether you could live with yourself afterward. Travis couldn't walk away from this, couldn't let Victor win, couldn't let those stolen pieces stay buried while families waited for closure. He walked back to the car and looked at Marcus. I'll do it, but I have conditions. Name them. First, if anything happens to me, the fortune gets returned to the families. Not sold at auction, not kept by the government. Returned. Marcus nodded. Agreed. Second, when this is over, I want to help. Want to personally return pieces to the families that can be traced. I need to see their faces. Need to know it mattered. Marcus looked at Patricia, then back at Travis. That's unusual, but I can arrange it. Third, Travis said, his voice harder now, if Victor shows up, you don't negotiate. You take him down. I don't care about his rights or his story. He threatened me. He stole from innocent people. He deserves whatever he gets. Marcus extended his hand. Deal. They shook. And just like that, Travis Holden went from victim to bait. The plan was simple in theory, complicated in execution. Travis would return to the cabin the next morning, acting like he was preparing to flee. He'd pack up items from the vault, nothing too valuable, just enough to make it look like he was stealing what he could carry. Marcus's team would be watching from hidden positions in the woods, waiting for Victor or his people to make a move. Travis spent that night in a motel room Patricia paid for, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Every sound in the hallway made him jump. Every car that pulled into the parking lot made him wonder if Victor had found him already. By dawn, he was exhausted and wired, running on coffee and fear. Marcus picked him up at 7, along with 2 FBI agents, a woman named Sarah, which made Travis's chest ache, and a man named Hector. They drove in silence back toward the mountains. We'll drop you a mile from the cabin, Marcus explained. You hike in, do exactly what we discussed, and wait. Don't engage if Victor shows up. Don't try to be a hero, just let us handle it. Travis nodded. They dropped him at the trailhead, and he watched their vehicle disappear around a bend. Then he was alone again, hiking through snow toward a cabin that might as well have been a trap. When he reached the clearing, everything looked exactly as he'd left it. Door still open. Footprints in the snow, but too many to tell who they belonged to. Travis went inside, his heart hammering. The vault was still untouched. He went down, grabbed a few small items, some cash, a couple of gemstones, nothing that would destroy the case but enough to look convincing, and brought them upstairs. He packed them into his bag, making noise, leaving the door open so anyone watching could see what he was doing. Then he waited. 1 hour passed. Then 2. Travis sat by the stove, pretending to rest, every nerve in his body screaming. He was about to give up, about to think that maybe Victor wasn't coming, when he heard it. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from the woods behind the cabin. Travis stood slowly, his hand moving toward the knife he'd tucked into his belt. The footsteps grew louder. Then a voice, rough and aged. "You must be Travis." A man stepped into the doorway. He was old, maybe 75, with white hair and a face carved by violence and time. He wore an expensive coat and leather gloves, and in his right hand he carried a gun. "Victor Salerno," Travis said. The old man smiled. "So you do know who I am. Good, that makes this easier." "Where are your people?" Travis asked, stalling. "Watching," Victor said. "Just like yours are, but mine are better shots." Travis's blood ran cold. Victor knew about the FBI, about the trap. He'd walked into it anyway. "Here's what's going to happen," Victor said, stepping further into the cabin. "You're going to take me down to that vault. You're going to show me everything Eugene stole from me. And then you're going to walk away and forget you ever found this place. And if I don't? Then I kill you," Victor said simply. "And I kill the pretty lawyer who's been helping you. And I kill the prosecutor who thinks he's smarter than me. I've been doing this for 50 years, son. You think you're the first person who tried to trap me?" Travis's mind raced. If Victor was here, if he knew about the FBI, then the plan had already failed. But Marcus and his team were out there. They had to be listening. "Why didn't Eugene give it back to you?" Travis asked, still stalling. "Why hide it all those years?" Victor's expression darkened. "Because Eugene was weak, got a conscience, started talking about returning things, about making amends, said he couldn't sleep anymore, couldn't live with what we'd done. So I was going to kill him, but he ran before I could, spent the rest of his pathetic life hiding up here like a rat." "He died full of regret," Travis said. "Died wishing he'd been stronger. He died a coward." Victor spat. "Now move, down to the vault. Time's up." Travis started toward the back room, his mind spinning. Where were Marcus and the agents? Why weren't they moving? Then he heard it. Sirens. Distant but growing louder. Victor heard them too. His eyes narrowed. "You!" The window shattered. Glass exploded inward as something crashed through, a flash grenade. The world turned white and silent. Travis hit the floor, covering his head. When his vision cleared seconds later, the cabin was full of FBI agents in tactical gear. Victor was on the ground, hands being zip-tied behind his back, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Marcus appeared in the doorway, gun drawn, looking at Travis. "You okay?" Travis nodded, unable to speak. They pulled Victor to his feet. The old man looked at Travis, his expression a mix of rage and something like respect. "You should have taken the money," Victor said. "Should have run." "I'm not you," Travis replied. They hauled Victor outside. Travis sat on the floor of the cabin, his whole body shaking. Patricia appeared moments later, rushing to him, checking for injuries. "It's over," she said. "You did it." But Travis wasn't sure it was over. Not yet. Over the next 3 days, the cabin became a crime scene. FBI agents catalogued every item in the vault, matched them against stolen property databases, and began the long process of identifying rightful owners. Marcus kept Travis informed every step of the way. Victor Salerno had been arraigned on 14 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of interstate transportation of stolen property, and 1 count of threatening a federal witness. He wasn't getting out. Ever. The fortune, as it turned out, was even larger than Travis had estimated. Once experts appraised everything, the total came to $263 million. Families began coming forward. The children of Patricia Hamilton wept when they were shown the Pollock painting their mother had lost. An elderly man in Boston identified a sculpture his father had commissioned in 1972 and never saw again. A museum in Connecticut recovered 3 pieces they'd thought were gone forever, and Travis was there for every reunion. He'd made Marcus promise, and Marcus kept his word. Travis stood beside agents as they returned items, watched as people held treasures they thought they'd never see again, listened to stories about grandparents and great-grandparents and the history these objects carried. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about giving back what had been stolen, about closure, about proving that even after decades, justice could still be served. One afternoon, Marcus pulled Travis aside. "There's something you should know. Victor had help. Inside help." "What do you mean?" "Someone at the sheriff's department in Ridgeway was feeding him information. That's how he knew you'd found the vault. You borrowed that truck from a local guy who mentioned it to his cousin, who happened to be on Victor's payroll. Small towns, small world." Travis felt sick. So Victor knew from the beginning. He knew someone was in the cabin. He was watching, waiting to see what you'd do. When Patricia called me, when we started putting together the operation, Victor's informant tipped him off. He walked into that cabin knowing it was a trap because he thought he could talk his way out, thought he could intimidate you into staying quiet. "He almost did," Travis admitted. Marcus shook his head. "No, he didn't. You held your ground. That takes guts." Later that night, Travis returned to the cabin one last time. The vault was empty now, every item catalogued and removed. The stone chamber echoed with his footsteps. He stood at Eugene's desk, where the ledger used to sit, and thought about the man who'd built this place. Eugene had tried to hide his guilt behind walls of stone and decades of silence. But guilt has a way of finding you no matter how deep you bury it. Travis had learned that the hard way. But he'd also learned something else, that doing the right thing, even when it cost everything, even when it put your life at risk, was the only way to live with yourself. He climbed back up, sealed the hatch, and walked out of the cabin. He didn't look back. The mountain had given him shelter when he had nothing, had hidden him when he wanted to disappear, but it had also given him something more important, a chance at redemption. A chance to prove that even broken people could do something that mattered. As Travis walked down the trail toward town, toward whatever came next, he felt Sarah's presence beside him, felt Cody's small hand in his, and for the first time since the accident, he felt like he'd honored their memory. Not by surviving, but by choosing to be the kind of man they'd always believed he could be, even when it nearly killed him, even when it would have been easier to walk away. He'd chosen right over easy, and that, Travis realized, was the only treasure worth keeping. 6 months after Victor Salerno's arrest, Travis Holden stood in a courtroom in Knoxville, watching as the judge sentenced the old man to 45 years in federal prison. Victor would die behind bars. There would be no parole, no second chances, no mercy for a man who'd shown none to others. As the bailiffs led Victor away, he turned one last time to look at Travis. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just exhaustion. Just the weight of 50 years of running finally catching up. Travis felt no satisfaction watching him go, no sense of victory, just a quiet relief that it was over. Outside the courthouse, Marcus stood with Patricia, both of them smiling. "You did good," Marcus said, shaking Travis's hand. "We recovered pieces worth over $263 million, returned property to 47 families, closed cases spanning 4 decades. None of that happens without you." Travis shook his head. "I just found a cabin." "You found a lot more than that," Patricia said gently. "You found courage." They took him to lunch at a diner downtown, the kind with checkered floors and waitresses who called everyone honey. Travis ordered coffee and barely touched his food, his mind elsewhere. He kept thinking about the cabin, about Eugene's final words in that ledger. Make it right. He'd done that. He'd returned the stolen fortune, brought Victor to justice, given families closure they'd waited decades to receive. But something still felt unfinished. "What are you going to do now?" Patricia asked, watching him. Travis looked up. "What do you mean?" "You can't go back to living rough in the mountains. You've been through too much. You deserve a fresh start." "With what money?" Travis asked. "I gave everything back." Marcus cleared his throat. "Actually, there's something we need to discuss. The federal government has a whistleblower reward program. In cases involving recovery of stolen property, the person who provides information leading to arrests and asset recovery can receive up to 10% of the total value." Travis's stomach dropped. 10% of $263 million is $26.3 million, Marcus finished. "We're recommending you receive the full amount. The paperwork's already in motion. Should be finalized within 60 days. Travis couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was hearing. $26 million. More money than he could spend in 5 lifetimes. Money he'd never asked for, never expected. "I don't want it," he said quietly. Patricia and Marcus exchanged glances. "Travis," Marcus started. "I don't want it," Travis repeated, louder now. "That money came from people's suffering. I can't take it." "It's not blood money," Patricia said. "It's compensation for the risk you took, for the justice you helped serve. You earned it." "I didn't do this to get rich," Travis said. "I did it because it was right." They were quiet for a moment. Then Marcus leaned forward. "What if you didn't keep it for yourself? What if you used it for something else?" Travis looked at him. "Like what?" "Like rebuilding the community that Cabin sits in," Marcus said. "I've done some research on that area. Ridgeway and the surrounding towns are dying. No jobs, no infrastructure, young people leaving because there's nothing to stay for. But with $26 million, you could change that. Build something meaningful." Travis felt something shift in his chest. Build something meaningful. That phrase echoed in his mind all through lunch and during the drive back to the mountains. By the time Patricia dropped him at the motel where he'd been staying, Marcus had arranged for the government to cover his housing while the case proceeded. Travis couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, he pulled out a notebook and started writing. Not plans exactly, just ideas, fragments of possibility. What would Sarah want him to do with this money? What would honor her memory and Cody's? The answer came to him around 3 in the morning when sleep wouldn't come and the motel walls felt like they were closing in. Sarah had always believed in education. She'd worked at a library because she loved books, loved learning, loved the idea that knowledge could change lives. And Cody had dreamed of being a geologist, of studying the earth and understanding how the world was built. What if Travis took that money and built something for them? Something that would help kids like Cody chase their dreams. Something that would bring hope back to communities like Ridgeway. By morning, he had a plan. Over the next 3 months, Travis worked harder than he'd worked in years. He met with city planners in Ridgeway, with the mayor, with business owners and teachers, and anyone who'd listen. He told them his story, not all of it, just enough. He'd come into some money, he said, and he wanted to invest it in the community that had sheltered him when he had nothing. The skepticism was immediate. Who was this homeless guy suddenly talking about millions of dollars? Where did the money come from? Was this some kind of scam? But Travis was patient. He brought Patricia to meetings to show them legal documents. He brought Marcus to explain the whistleblower program and how it worked. He showed them his vision, a community center that would offer job training, GED programs, and apprenticeships. A scholarship fund for local kids who wanted to go to college but couldn't afford it. A renovation of the old library that had been closed for 5 years due to budget cuts. And at the center of it all, the cabin. Eugene's cabin, where the fortune had been hidden. Travis wanted to turn it into a museum, not a celebration of the theft, but a reminder. A place where people could learn about what greed costs, about the importance of doing what's right even when it's hard, about second chances and redemption. The resistance was strong at first. Some people thought he was crazy. Others thought he was trying to ease his own guilt. But slowly, person by person, Travis won them over. The turning point came when he met with a woman named Helen, a retired teacher in her 70s who'd lived in Ridgeway her whole life. She invited him to her home, served him tea in a china cup, and looked him straight in the eye. "Why do you really want to do this?" she asked. Travis didn't have a prepared answer. He just told her the truth. "I lost my wife and son 4 years ago. Lost everything that mattered. Spent 2 years wishing I was dead. Then I found that cabin and that fortune, and I realized something. I'd been given a second chance. Not to get rich, not to start over like nothing happened, but to do something that would make them proud, something that would prove their lives mattered." His voice cracked. "I can't bring them back, can't undo the accident, but I can make sure other families don't lose their kids because there's no opportunity here. Can make sure other people don't feel as hopeless as I did. That's why." Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Then let's build something beautiful." She became his first ally, then his champion. Helen knew everyone in town, and when she started telling people that Travis was legitimate, that his heart was in the right place, doors began to open. By the time the whistleblower reward was officially approved and the money transferred into a trust Travis had set up with Patricia's help, the plans were already in motion. The first project was the community center. Travis bought an old warehouse on the edge of town that had been empty for a decade and hired local contractors to renovate it. He insisted on using local labor, paying above market rates, giving jobs to people who'd been unemployed for months or years. The work took 6 months. Travis was on site every day, not as a boss but as a laborer. He hauled lumber, painted walls, installed drywall. His hands, which had been soft from 2 years of doing nothing, became calloused again. His body, which had grown thin and weak, started to rebuild muscle and strength. And his mind, which had been clouded by grief for so long, started to clear. Working with his hands, building something tangible, something good, it was therapy in a way no counselor could have provided. The other workers noticed. At first, they'd been wary of him, but as days turned to weeks and Travis showed up early every morning, worked as hard as anyone, and never complained, they started to respect him, started to trust him. One afternoon, a guy named Bobby, a carpenter in his 40s who'd lost his construction job 2 years earlier, pulled Travis aside during lunch. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "The manual labor, I mean. You've got millions. You could hire people and never get your hands dirty." Travis looked at his paint-stained palms. "Because I need to. Need to feel like I'm building something real. Need to remember what it's like to create instead of destroy." Bobby nodded slowly. "That cabin really changed you, didn't it?" "It saved me," Travis said simply. By the time the community center opened in late spring, the whole town showed up. Helen cut the ribbon with a pair of comically large scissors, and everyone cheered. Inside, the center offered something Ridgeway hadn't had in years: hope. There were classrooms where adults could study for their GED, a computer lab with internet access for job applications, a workshop with tools for trades training, welding, electrical work, plumbing, and in the back, a quiet room filled with books dedicated to Sarah. Travis had commissioned a plaque that read, "In memory of Sarah Holden, who believed knowledge could change the world." The first week, 23 people signed up for classes. By the end of the first month, that number had tripled. People who'd given up on finding work started training for new careers. Kids who'd dropped out of high school came back to finish, and slowly, business by business, Ridgeway started to come back to life. But Travis wasn't done. The scholarship fund launched that fall. 5 local students received full rides to college, tuition, room, board, everything covered. One of them, a girl named Emma, wanted to study geology. When Travis met her at the awards ceremony, when she told him about her dreams of studying earthquakes and volcanic activity, he had to step outside because he couldn't stop crying. She reminded him so much of Cody. Same curiosity, same bright eyes, same hunger to understand the world. He gave her a box that night. Inside was Cody's rock collection, carefully preserved, each stone labeled in a 7-year-old's handwriting. "These belong to my son," Travis told her. "He wanted to be a geologist too. I think he'd want you to have them." Emma held the box like it was made of glass, tears streaming down her face. "I'll take care of them," she whispered. "I promise." That moment, more than anything else, made Travis feel like he'd finally done something worthy of Sarah and Cody's memory. The library reopened 6 months later. Travis had funded a complete renovation, new books, new computers, new furniture, but he'd also insisted on keeping some of the old. The wooden reading table where Sarah used to work still sat in the center of the main room. Her name was engraved on a small brass plaque attached to it. On opening day, the mayor gave a speech about community and resilience and second chances. Then he invited Travis to say a few words. Travis hadn't prepared anything. He walked to the podium, looked out at the faces, people he'd come to know over the past year, people who'd helped him build all of this, and spoke from the heart. "A year and a half ago, I came to these mountains to die. Not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly, quietly. I'd lost everything that mattered, and I didn't see a reason to keep going. Then I found a cabin that became a shelter, and in that shelter, I found a secret that changed my life. But it wasn't the money that saved me. It was the choice. The choice to do what was right even when it was dangerous. The choice to trust people even when I was scared. The choice to build something instead of giving up." He paused, looking at Helen, at Bobby, at Emma holding Cody's rock collection. "This community saved me as much as I've tried to help it. You gave me purpose when I had none. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning. You reminded me that even broken people can do something that matters. So thank you, all of you, for letting me be part of this." The applause was thunderous. Later, as people filtered out, Travis stood alone in the library. He ran his hand across Sarah's table, felt the smooth wood, and whispered, "We did it, sweetheart. We built something beautiful." The cabin became the final piece. Travis worked with a local architect to turn it into a small museum. They reinforced the structure, added proper heating and electricity, but kept the rustic character. The vault beneath remained intact, but empty now. Visitors could descend the stone steps and see where the fortune had been hidden. Educational displays explained Eugene's story, the crimes, the recovery, the justice that followed. But more importantly, the museum told Travis's story. How a broken man had stumbled into something bigger than himself. How he'd chosen principle over profit. How he'd used his second chance to help others find theirs. The museum opened on a cold November morning, exactly 2 years after Travis had first found the cabin during that winter storm. Families came from across the state. Reporters showed up. Marcus and Patricia drove in for the ceremony, and standing in the back, barely visible, were some of the families who'd gotten their stolen property back. The children of Patricia Hamilton, whose Pollock painting had been returned. An elderly sculptor whose father's work had been recovered. A museum director whose collection was whole again. They'd all come to say thank you. Travis gave them a tour personally, walking them through the cabin, showing them where everything had been hidden. And in the final room of the museum, there was a wall. The Wall of Return, they called it. On it were photographs of every item that had been recovered and returned. And beside each photo was a small story about the family it belonged to, about what it meant to them, about the closure it provided. Travis stood in front of that wall for a long time during the opening, reading the stories, remembering the faces. "You did good," a voice said behind him. He turned. It was Marcus. "Those families, they have their history back because of you." "I just found it," Travis said. "No," Marcus corrected. "You saved it. There's a difference." That night, after everyone had gone and the museum was quiet, Travis walked through the cabin one last time. He stood in the main room where he'd first taken shelter, where he'd fed that old wood stove and felt warmth for the first time in months. He descended into the vault, now empty but preserved, and remembered the shock of that first discovery. And he climbed up to the loft, where he'd spent so many sleepless nights trying to figure out what to do. This place had been his refuge, his prison, his salvation. It had given him shelter when he needed it most, and then it had given him something even more important, a purpose. As he locked the museum door and walked down the trail toward town, toward the small apartment he now rented above the community center, Travis thought about how far he'd come. 2 years ago, he'd been a ghost, a man waiting to fade away. Now he was building schools and funding scholarships and employing people who'd lost hope. Now he woke up every morning with a reason to get out of bed. The grief hadn't disappeared. He still thought about Sarah and Cody every day, still felt the ache of their absence like a physical wound. But the grief had transformed into something else, something that pushed him forward instead of dragging him down. He'd learned to carry it differently, to let it fuel his work instead of consuming his soul. Over the following year, the impact of Travis's investments rippled outward. 3 new businesses opened in Ridgeway, a cafe that hired local teenagers, a hardware store that brought back an old family business, a medical clinic that served the surrounding communities. Property values started to rise. Families who'd moved away started coming back, and the population, which had been declining for 2 decades, finally stabilized and began to grow. But Travis didn't take credit for any of it. When reporters asked him about the transformation, he always said the same thing. "I just opened a door. The people here walked through it and did the work themselves." He lived simply. The trust he'd set up with Patricia distributed the money carefully, strategically, always focused on sustainable change rather than quick fixes. Travis paid himself a modest salary, enough to live on, but nothing extravagant. He didn't need much, didn't want much. He'd learned the hard way that money couldn't buy happiness, but it could create opportunities, it could give people a fighting chance, and that was worth more than any mansion or luxury car. One spring afternoon, nearly 3 years after finding the cabin, Travis was working at the community center when a young woman walked in. She was in her 20s, carrying a backpack, and she looked lost. "Can I help you?" Travis asked. She looked at him, her eyes uncertain. "Are you Travis Holden?" "I am." "I'm Jennifer Birch. Eugene was my grandfather." Travis felt his heart stop. Eugene's granddaughter. He'd had family after all. "I didn't know he had any relatives," Travis said carefully. Jennifer sat down, her hands shaking slightly. "He didn't speak to us for years. After he disappeared, my family tried to find him, but he'd vanished completely. We thought he was dead." She pulled out a worn photograph. "Then I saw a news article about the museum, about what you found, about what my grandfather did." She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "I need to know. Was he a monster? Was he just a thief who got what he deserved?" Travis sat down across from her. He thought about Eugene's ledger, about the entries filled with regret and guilt, about a man who'd spent 27 years alone trying to make sense of what he'd done. "Your grandfather made terrible choices," Travis said honestly. "He stole from people, hurt families, caused pain that lasted for decades. But he also spent the last part of his life trying to document everything, trying to create a record so that someday someone could make it right." "Did he suffer?" Jennifer asked quietly. Travis nodded. "Every day. You could see it in his writing. The guilt ate him alive." "Good," Jennifer said, then immediately looked ashamed. "No, I don't mean that. I needed to know he understood what he did was wrong." "He did," Travis assured her. "And in the end, he left a message for whoever found his secret. He asked them to return everything, to do what he couldn't." Jennifer wiped her eyes. "And you did?" "I tried," Travis said. "I'm still trying." They talked for 2 hours. Travis showed her the museum, let her read parts of Eugene's ledger, helped her understand the grandfather she'd never really known, and when she left, Jennifer hugged him. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not letting his story end with shame, for turning something terrible into something good." After she left, Travis stood in the museum and thought about redemption. about how Eugene had died seeking it but never finding it, about how Travis had found it not through grand gestures but through small, consistent choices to do better, to be better. The years continued to pass. The community center thrived. The scholarship fund sent 23 kids to college over 5 years. The museum became a destination, drawing thousands of visitors who came to learn about art theft, about justice, about the cost of greed and the power of second chances. And Travis, slowly and steadily, healed. He started dating again, a woman named Claire who taught at the library. Nothing serious at first, just coffee and conversations. But gradually, something grew. She understood his grief, didn't try to fix him, just walked beside him as he figured out how to live again. On what would have been Cody's 13th birthday, Travis and Claire hiked up to the cabin. They sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, and Travis told her about his son, about the rock collection and the dreams of being a geologist, about the tire swing and the gaps in his teeth. "He sounds wonderful," Claire said. "He was," Travis replied. "And I spent 2 years trying to forget him because remembering hurt too much. But now I realize that remembering is the only way to keep him alive, to make sure he still matters." Claire took his hand. "He matters, and so do you." 5 years after finding the cabin, Travis stood in a packed auditorium at the University of Tennessee. Emma, the geology student he'd given Cody's rock collection to, was graduating summa cum laude. She'd published 2 papers on seismic activity in the Appalachian Mountains. She'd been accepted to graduate school at MIT. She was going to change the world. When they called her name, Emma walked across the stage, received her diploma, and then did something unexpected. She pulled out a small rock from her pocket, a piece of quartz from Cody's collection, and held it up. "This is for Cody," she said into the microphone, "and for Mr. Holden, who taught me that our losses don't define us. What we build from them does." The crowd erupted in applause. Travis, sitting in the audience beside Claire, couldn't stop the tears. That night, lying in bed, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a desperate, broken man hiding in the mountains to someone who'd found purpose in the most unlikely place. He'd lost everything, found a fortune, given it away, and in the process discovered something more valuable than all the gold and gemstones in the world. The knowledge that his life still mattered, that he could still make a difference, that even in the deepest darkness there was a path back to light. The cabin on the ridge stood as a testament to that truth. It was no longer a hiding place, it was a beacon, a reminder that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, always find their way to the surface. And that when they do, we have a choice, to turn away or to face them head on, no matter the cost. Travis had faced them, had chosen the harder path, and in doing so had transformed not just his own life, but an entire community. Years later, when people asked him about the $245 million, about the fortune that had been hidden beneath that cabin, Travis always gave the same answer. "I found something worth far more than money. I found a reason to keep living, and that's a treasure you can't put a price on." Anyone can rebuild from nothing if they're willing to face the truth, choose what's right over what's easy, and believe that second chances aren't given, they're earned through the courage to start again. As the sun rose over the mountains one quiet morning, Travis Holden stood on the porch of the museum that had once been his shelter, watching as the first visitors of the day began arriving to learn the story of the cabin, the fortune, and the man who chose redemption over riches. He no longer saw himself as the broken man who'd stumbled into these woods looking for a place to die. He was a builder now, a guardian of stories, a living reminder that our greatest treasures aren't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the hope we choose to create from our deepest pain. Because for Travis, and for every person who's ever lost everything and found the strength to begin again, the end of one story is always the beginning of another. And sometimes the most valuable discovery isn't what we find in the darkness, but who we become when we bring it into the light. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories of survival, redemption, and the unexpected treasures that change everything. Click to continue the journey with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that doing the right thing, no matter how hard, is always worth it in the end.